So please take a seat. Thanks for moving up. Move up a few lines there. All right, let's give just a quick introduction from Mr. Horvat. We're very happy to have TFP Vice President, Mr. John Horvat, speak to us tonight on the issue of socialism. And it's an issue that us Americans, it's almost like in our DNA to be against socialism, because it just goes so much against what we are and what we're supposed to be as a country. And unfortunately, though, in the last few years, especially among the youth, there's been a trend to accept socialism as a trendy idea. So today, Mr. Horvat is going to show us why socialism is wrong, especially from a Catholic point of view, and also to be reminded that Our Lady at Fatima said that as punishment to the world for its sins, that there would be the spreading of socialism and communism all across the world. So with these things in mind, I ask you to please give Mr. Horvat a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. The victory of Socialist Zohrab Mamdani as mayor of New York City has a lot of people talking about socialism today. Among liberals, socialism is becoming popular again. Now, obviously, most people don't go so far as to support hardcore socialism like communist Cuba or North Korea, but they will talk about democratic socialism. And some people on the left think that just because you add the adjective, it makes socialism the way for the future. And I always marvel how that a brand with such a bad name of socialism can become popular again. I mean, socialism has delivered such horrible results everywhere. And yet today, America's most capitalist and richest city is now governed by an admitted socialist. And other cities are following suit. And I believe that part of the reason for this attraction is that in hard times, socialists talk about empowering people and giving them free stuff. Of course, the free stuff is never free. More often than not, it comes from our pockets, for you and me. But this new trend towards socialism is very concerning. The slippery ramp to socialist misery starts with the introduction of things like democratic socialism. That's why we must fight socialism in any form, wherever it appears. But it's not just the free stuff. Another reason for the popularity is because people don't understand the true nature of socialism. They have this idea, if we could just get somebody to make it work, everybody would be much happier. They think about socialism as something that you're sharing with the poor, you're making people feel good. And so they say, well, let's give socialism another chance. And you see this lack of understanding in a slogan that's like a mantra. And it circulates wherever socialism takes power. And I'm sure you've all heard it and probably even said it many times. I've said it many times myself. It is that whenever socialism or communism appears, people everywhere reply by saying, don't worry, because socialism doesn't work. And that's the mantra. Socialism does not work. It's repeated over and over and over again. And the mantra is true. Socialism has never delivered prosperity and always distributed misery. But what I don't like about it is that it communicates the idea that we don't need to worry too much because it will always fail. The idea is that we'll suffer a little bit if socialism comes, but in the end, we'll always return to a market economy. And this attitude, the attitude this mantra spreads has the bad effect of minimizing the threat. Insinuates that socialists are idealistic fools, that they don't need to be taken seriously. And that's not true. Socialists are real threats. I mean, apparently something works with them because they just won New York City. They must be doing something right. And the fact that they managed to take power in so many countries throughout history and now in New York indicates they know how to manipulate the public and win. And what's worse is those socialists usually take power because those who oppose them make the stupidest mistakes and most outrageous concessions and lose. So I'd like to present something about socialism that'll help you understand better the enemy we face, especially noting that people like Mayor Mandami are winning. We can't defeat socialism by throwing slogans and chanting mantras at it. We must understand, attack the nature of the enemy if we're going to win. So let me begin by telling you a little story. It's whenever I hear this socialism doesn't work mantra, I'm reminded of a trip I took to Poland in 2004. Now, back then, the country was just bubbling with activities as it was awakening from the nightmare of communism. When you could feel the excitement in the air, the Poles were putting things back in order. It was really an amazing time. Everything was new and improving, painted and repaired. A lot of new business and prosperity. They were restoring things. It was just really amazing to see what was happening. But one afternoon, I was walking the streets of Krakow, which is the big city in the south. And I happened upon an alley and casually entered the alley. And I was shocked to find that all the buildings in the alley were gray and dilapidated and neglected. And I still remember the sensation of seeing the scene and the strong impression it caused me. I remember thinking, now something's very wrong here. I better get out of here. And I immediately left because I saw this alley with these dilapidated buildings. And later I asked a Polish TFP member about my gray alley of despair experience. And he told me that I had entered one of the very few completely unrestored parts in downtown Krakow. And then he said something that shocked me. He said, the whole city used to look like this, the buildings in the alley. All Krakow was gray and depressing during the communist regime. And even more, all Poland was gray, ugly, and sad. I once asked another TFP member, Polish TFP member, what it was like to live under communism. And he said, you felt a very oppressive atmosphere everywhere. And what he especially remembered was the silence that reigned. No one socialized. People lived in fear. I mean, we can't imagine what it's like, but the gray alley of despair certainly gives you an idea because it was very depressing. Now, as I traveled around the country, I began to notice other signs that what socialism does to the country. For example, in the industrial suburbs of many of the big cities, I saw block after block after block of gray concrete apartment buildings, all equal, all unadorned, broken down, and depressing. And these were buildings that were built for the workers during the communist regime. And I was even impressed by the efforts of the new owners of these buildings because they were painting them, modifying them, changing them, and livening them up, trying to give them some kind of, make them look livable and give them some soul. But it was obvious that the idea of the socialists who built them was all living quarters had to be equal, ugly, and gray. It was intentional. And this grayness permeated everything in Poland. Later, I learned about socialist building codes that were still in effect, preventing owners from improving their properties. For example, the apartment where I was staying was remodeled, but the lobby area was a disaster because its ownership was in question, and the old socialist laws of common property still applied. And everywhere I turned, I could see this leftover spirit of grayness, dreary grayness. It could even be seen in the coarse manners. It could be found in the little smallest things, even years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain. And I imagine some things still remain today. Such was the impact of this anti-natural regime. Now, most people, when you hear this report that I've just given you, would conclude that my observations are yet one more proof that socialism doesn't work. I mean, the mantra that socialism does not work is completely correct. What more evidence do you need? Everything failed to achieve prosperity. So here you have the failure of a defective economic system that rewards laziness, encourages theft, and confiscates and redistributes property. It also proves that the socialists are not intelligent people, but are all fools. They can't see the obvious, that socialism does not cause society to prosper, despite so many efforts. And the worst thing is these socialists seem doomed to be constantly repeating their mistakes and never get it right. They keep banging their heads against the wall. Poland failed, Soviet Union failed, Cuba's still failing, New York will fail. I mean, when will they ever learn? However, from what I saw in Poland, I came to an opposite and even a more terrifying conclusion, which is socialism works, and it works well. Now, my point is that I saw a pattern in Poland. This impoverishment was intentional. There was no mistake. I mean, the horrible greyness was not caused by socialist leaders who were making endless attempts to reach prosperity and with the broken tools and a defective system. These people who created the people who created these things wanted them to be that way because this scenario reflects the socialist doctrine. They want a gray equal society because in a gray society, nobody stands out. And so for us to decide whether socialism works or not, the key is to agree on what we mean by works. I mean, we could say, when we say something works, we mean it functions according to its nature and intended purpose. A car that does not move forward fails to perform its transportation function. It doesn't work. A piano that can only play half the notes in the C major scale fails to reach its musical end. It doesn't work. So it is with economic systems. A free market economy and its corresponding society aim to produce great wealth and prosperity. They do this through certain rules and systems. I mean, this system has its many shortcomings. It's not a Christian order, for one. However, if you look at all the economic textbooks, and you'll see that a market economy's stated goal is human flourishing. I mean, it's been that way since Aristotle. And the natural result of a free market economy is a hierarchical society in which all individuals prosper according to their efforts. The system rewards and encourages people to stand out. In addition, the culture strives for excellence by constantly seeking to improve production and efficiency and prosperity. When a market society prospers, it reaches its goal. It works. When a stock market generates great financial losses instead of profits, we say it crashed. It didn't work. It did not achieve its goal of creating value. However, a socialist economy and its corresponding society are different. Its stated aim is not to create wealth to the maximum possible degree. It never promises profits. In fact, Marxists call profit surplus value. That is that surplus part of the price that the owner keeps, which Marxists classify as theft from the workers. And so socialism's stated aim is not to create wealth, but to redistribute it. It's not to defend private property, but to eventually eliminate it. Marx wrote that the summary of his doctrine can be found in one sentence: the abolition of private property. And so the Marxist dream is a regime of total equality and freedom in which there are neither profits, property, money, or morality. That would not exist. And so when people say that socialism doesn't work, what they really mean is that it does not produce the same results as a market economy and society. And they're right. I mean, true socialists don't share that human flourishing goals of a free market economy and society. It's not their goal, never was. They never promised it, and they never delivered it. No one should be surprised. And that's why it's important we understand what socialism actually promises. And then we can then oppose it better and more efficiently. We can explain our objectives much better. We can affirm our Catholic position with much more security. And so that's what I'm going to do now. We'll first discuss what socialism is, and then examine its promises. And then we'll ask, does socialism work? So what is socialism? Professor Clínico de Oliveira, he taught that socialism in all its forms is not just an economic system, it's a philosophical, materialistic, and atheistic sect that idealizes an egalitarian system where everyone's equal. It says it goes beyond economics. He says that socialism represents an entirely different worldview that promotes its own way of life, mindset, and mentality. And the socialists themselves admit that their worldview encompasses the whole person and everything around the person. It's diametrically opposed to the teachings of the church. And Dr. Payne had no illusions about socialism. It's not communism light. Marx and Engels used the terms communism and socialism interchangeably, although others later made minor distinctions. When we talk about socialism, we're talking about it in all of its manifestations, flavors, and varieties. Marxism, socialism, democratic socialism, self-managing socialism, communism, utopian communism, and so many other labels that are out there. There are just literally dozens of labels. But they're all based on the writings of Marx and share the same fundamental principles. Indeed, socialism is a brand that covers a multitude of sins. All communist countries, for example, call themselves socialists. It was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. China's Mao Zedong is quoted as saying that he aimed to create a socialist society. The Nazi Party in Germany was the National Socialist Party. And we can also say that many laws and taxes and super regulations here in the United States are based on socialist ideas and goals. And so all the Marxists share the same premises and promises. They only differ in their application and intensity. They can range from a government that's super regulated, that keeps everything under control, to the entire and total control of a society in all of its aspects. Regardless of how you classify it, all Marxist varieties will make four promises. And that's what I'm going to give you now. And these are the four telltale signs that the system is working as promised. Now, the first promise is equality, especially economic equality. Socialism will always try to equalize wealth by looking for ways to redistribute it. Socialism's goal is not to accumulate wealth, but to be constantly redistributing it, making sure other people don't get too much. Wherever socialism takes hold, it suppresses what it considers excessive wealth. It does this through taxation, overregulation, legislation, or even confiscation. And so we can say that socialism works when it tears down people's fortunes. And this is something Mayor Mondavi openly promised. He's going to tax the rich is his dominant slogan. Go after the millionaires and billionaires and probably thousandaires. No one should have excessive wealth. It's theft that the people have the right to take from them. And true to his promise, at the end of January, 1 month after he took office, the mayor of New York announced that there was a $10 billion deficit in the city's budget and asked the state government for permission for the city to raise taxes on the city's rich residents and corporations to fill the gap. Socialists always determine what they mean by excessive wealth. And they may start by taking it from the very rich, but it always ends up taking from the less rich and even the middle class wealth, you and me. In Ukraine in the 30s, the communists especially targeted the kulaks, the prosperous small farmers who are the middle class, not the rich people. Socialism, for example, will always favor agrarian land reform. It targets the great landowners, it confiscates the big farms, but it doesn't divide them up and give them to everybody, to all the small plots to every worker. Socialist land reform schemes set up communes and cooperatives where everyone works equally together. They know that if they give away the plots, to the workers. In 10 years, people will sell their plots and the situation will return to a system of large, medium, and small farms as it was before. It's human nature. So it doesn't matter how hard you work for what you own. They still defend the right to take it, tax it, or overregulate it. Now, from the perspective of the poor, the concrete effect of socialism is that it favors the lazy. If you don't have to work to receive something, you'll simply not make the effort. You feel entitled to everything. You'll constantly be trying to game the system to get more for the least amount of effort. And on the part of the rich, the concrete effect of the constant effort to take away property is for the rich to strive not to show it. If you show too much property, you immediately become the target of the socialist confiscators. And so a socialist society looks shabby on purpose. People hide what little wealth they have. They don't desire to stand out. Everything must be the same. Everything must be gray, since it is a very inexpressive color. In a socialist society, everything becomes and looks impoverished. I remember reading an account of some people who were trying to escape from the Soviet Union. I believe it was in the 30s or something like that. And they were going across a border region in the border with Finland. And that border is a very rough border, and there was still not a wall or fence or anything there, but it was a very difficult area to penetrate. You didn't know where you were. And they were going across that area, and they said, well, how will we know we're in Finland? And they kept walking and walking and walking, and they came to a house, and they said, shall we knock? We don't know what if we knock and it's Russian? We'll be sent back. But then one of them looked, and he saw this wood pile all neatly stacked. And he said, we're in Finland. In Russia, that would never happen. Well-stacked wood, you put your wealth neatly on display. And so they knew they were in Finland. So when you create a shabby society, it's something that it's something that affects everyone. You attack what is called the social function of private property. The Catholic Church teaches that private property has a social function, serving as a goal for others to imitate. For example, if you all have a beautiful house, it benefits all society, because those who have less beautiful houses look at your house and are inspired to work harder so that they can also enjoy the beauty of a better house. In a society where everything's beautiful, there is this constant effort toward ever greater beauty. Everyone inspires each other in a race to the top, because the mere existence of a beautiful house proclaims to everyone that it is possible. It is a feasible goal. If you work hard, it challenges and inspires others to do the same, or even better. However, in a socialist society, it hides the wealth. There are no beautiful goals. There is a constant race to the bottom to avoid standing out and triggering persecution. It pulls all society down. I mean, think of it as a negative neighborhood watch or a homeowners association that's constantly watching for those who have too much and denounces people to the authorities if things look suspiciously unequal. And so to conclude, socialism undermines wealth by using government power to tax, regulate, and confiscate property. In the name of equality for the masses, it will favor the marginalized or anyone they could designate as oppressed and downtrodden. That's why they will also favor a woke agenda or the DEI initiatives, all these other socialist ideas, because basically it goes back to the idea of this equality. Now, the second thing that socialism promises is varying degrees of social ownership of goods and services. And so you have community, collective, or public ownership of major industries and services. That means putting the means of production, distribution, and exchange in public instead of private hands. And so in the more radical socialist countries, they put utilities, transportation networks, healthcare, and other major facilities under government control. They'll nationalize major companies like the oil industry in Venezuela or the sugar industry in Cuba. And socialists promise that through the government, the people will own these things. And when they take over, it's not a matter of making things prosperous or better, it's about transferring ownership to the people. These socialists will not only may make some vague promises of a better life, but the main thing is this transformation, this transferring of ownership, making everything equal. Now, socialists know that if you pay more, you'll get better services or more products. But they don't want a system where there are multiple producers who will give varying degrees of products. Equality trumps everything. No one should get more or better service than others, so all production must be equal, even if it be bad. And therefore, there must be universal health care for everyone. There must be equal phone or electric service for everyone. This is all done in the name of socialist principles. And it's usually done badly. I mean, government health care is notoriously bad, as can be seen in Canada and England. Government utilities in socialist countries run down because they lack proper maintenance and investment and strategy. Cuba and Venezuela, for example, live in the midst of rolling blackouts and broken infrastructure. When socialist and communist governments nationalize their best industries, they end up destroying them. For example, Cuba is a former top sugar exporter. They now import sugar. Venezuela could not produce enough oil. They used to produce 3 million barrels a day. Now they produce 300,000. In the concrete example of New York City, Mayor Mandami is proposing government-owned grocery stores to compete with the heavily taxed and regulated private ones. He's calling for free bus fare. Under socialism, production must be equal and under government control. Now, the third thing that socialism promises is that it will meet basic needs. When socialist revolutionaries work to overthrow governments, they promise that everyone will have everything they need and want, and of course, everything will be free. However, what they're really promising is they'll keep you alive. They'll provide you with the basics, not too much more than that. In some really radical Marxist countries like Cuba or North Korea, not even the basics. I found an example of that just the day before yesterday. I was looking at the local paper. I think it's called the York Sun. And they had an article about the situation in Venezuela. And I was reading about it, and they were talking about the monthly minimum wage in Venezuela. And it said it was $1 a month. And I said, well, I did double take it. Oh, that can't be. Nobody can get $1 a month. So I did a Google search, and I found out that, I'll read it. It says, the official government mandated minimum wage in Venezuela remains fixed at 130 bolivars a month, a rate unchanged since March 2022. So they didn't even get a cost of living upgrade on these things, which now equates to approximately $1.50 to $3.50 a month, depending on the exchange rate. So if you shop around and you really get a good rate, you might get up to $3.50, but usually you'll range around $1.50 or. And there are other articles that say that it goes below $1. But this is the kind of things that happen in socialist country. It's really an abomination, because what they're doing is depriving workers of their just wages, which is a sin that cries to heaven for vengeance. You can't make it on $150 a day. $1.50 a day. It's getting that way here, 150. But anyway. Most socialist countries, usually what they do is they have this minimum wage, but they have a system of theft and corruption, or they get money from outside. The people who left the country send money inside, but that's pretty much how they get by. And it's obviously not the best way, and it doesn't work. It shows it doesn't work, and it is something that the Catholic Church is especially aware of. The Catholic Church condemns poverty largely because, well, it counsels poverty for those who can live a life under poverty. But for the normal people, it condemns poverty not only because it makes people suffer, but because it creates conditions where people will be tempted to steal and lie and do vices to survive. So it's poverty is not an ideal situation. We want to overcome poverty. I was reminded of an example in Cuba of how they steal from the system, or they game the system. Somebody told me that in Cuba they read about a case of a street vendor was selling burned out light bulbs. They said, why? Well, why would they be doing that? They said, well, you buy the light bulb, and then you go to work, and you go to the closet, and you unscrew the one light bulb, and you put the other one in, and you're left. You get a new light bulb at half the price. But those are the kind of things that are done under socialist regime because they do not provide for those goods. What is really important is not so much the small quantity of goods or the $1 monthly wage. It's also the poor quality that's promised. When socialists say basic needs, they exclude everything that shows signs of inequality. It is an inequality. It is equality in consumption. Because if people are equal, the products they consume should also be equal. And so they need to make all products equal without adornment, without color or refinement. And so their production tends to be brutal, plain, and gray. The socialist mindset is a materialistic mindset that says the only thing that matters is matter itself. It doesn't recognize spiritual aspects of things or human spiritual influence upon matter. And so socialists do not recognize anything spiritual in products such as beauty, taste, or refinement. It calls for the destruction of excellence and refinement because these are manifestations of the spirit, which they do not believe in. They only believe in this materialistic aspect. When the socialists took over in Chile, for example, they invaded the best cattle ranches and killed and ate the most prized breeding bulls because they hated the animals as a reflection of excellence in breeding that had been developed over decades, if not centuries. I remember a story told by Father Robert Sirico, who is the founder of the Acton Institute, a free market think tank. Father Sirico was a radical leftist in California during the 60s and a personal friend of Jane Fonda. And he likes to tell of an incident that led him to reject socialism and become pro-market, and then return to the church and eventually led to him becoming a priest. And so he said, quote, "We were sitting around the living room talking with a bunch of socialists. We were sitting around the living room talking about our dreams, about what the world would look like when the revolution comes. Everyone would be equal. There would be no more classism, homophobia, or sexism. And it was in this relaxed and trusting atmosphere that I said something to the effect that, yes, and when the revolution comes, we'll all be able to shop at Gucci." He says there was a silence. The smoke, he said, stood in the air. He later said, "I prefer not to say what kind of smoke it was." He said, "My good friend Anne was sitting on the floor next to me, and she leaned over and said, 'Gucci.' And I replied, 'Yes, that's the kind of society we're seeking, where everyone has access to quality goods and services.' 'Gucci?' she asked again. And she looked around at the room at all the comrades, and she said, 'Bob, I don't think you're really a socialist.'" That incident started his conversion because he realized that socialism was not about making people having quality goods and services, but making everyone equally poor. It was not about quality goods for everyone, but vulgar goods. And he had the good sense to reject this and change his life. And so socialism stands not only for equal production, but also equal consumption of goods, where no one stands out, where no one stands out. Now, the final thing that socialism promises is that what we call worker and people empowerment, giving workers democratic control over their workplaces, their institutions, and communities. And they usually do this through small committees. They're also called Soviets in Russian, that end up controlling society. I mean, we're already familiar with this empowerment, just as a side note. Among the Catholic left, the equivalent of the empowerment of the workers is the empowerment of the faithful, also called synodality. The idea is the same. people decide through carefully staged sessions of small groups managed by facilitators who do the will of socialism. Now, this promise means the destruction of hierarchy, because the equality of people also calls for the equality of functions. The radical supporters of Mayor Mandami, for example, are already proposing the establishment of popular assemblies in the local communities to empower the people. These radicals are saying we need to do this kind of thing in New York. Wherever socialism appears, it flattens society. In a special kind of socialism called self-managing socialism, which the TFP fought in the 80s, everything would be decided by committees. Home decoration, leisure, family, education, companies, agriculture. The smallest details of personal lives would be self-managed and socialist. Now, many people have the mistaken notion that socialist leaders are in it for the money and the power. But the most radical socialists hate the very idea of leadership because it says some people are more than others. And some socialists refuse the honor of leading when offered because any form of leadership affirms inequality. So they promote the idea of people-run companies, schools, and institutions. The idea is that the authority comes from the people, directly from the people, and not from God. And this always ends up destroying society. So let me summarize what we've seen before coming to a conclusion. We talked about the mantra, socialism does not work. And what we've seen through the example of a trip to Poland is that socialism does work in the sense that it delivers what it promises. And thus we've seen 4 promises that socialism makes and delivers, referencing past regimes, Poland, the socialist government in New York's Mayor Mandami. And those 4 promises are, the first promise is of equal wealth. We see excessive wealth as theft from the people. Thus, it discourages wealth by taxing, regulating, and confiscating property. It destroys the social function of property, in which people seek to improve their property through the example of others. Call it equal assets. The second thing that socialism promises is social ownerships on goods and services. Call it equal production. That means putting the means of production, distribution, exchange in public hands. It means limiting the options of producing goods so that no one can receive more than others. That is to say, we must distribute the bad effects of inefficient government management equally. The third thing socialism promises is meeting basic needs. Call it equal consumption. That means reducing needs to the most basic level without manifesting any spiritual qualities such as taste or beauty. It leads to a society where everything is reduced to the lowest level of goods and the blandest shades of grayness. And finally, socialism promises worker and people empowerment, which means the flattening of society and the destruction of hierarchy. Call it equal functions. Everything needs to be decided by committees controlled by facilitators. So socialism incorporates all 4 of these promises into its programs. And socialism delivers on all 4 of these promises: asset, production, consumption, and functional equality. And so what can we conclude from these considerations? First thing we conclude is the socialists have an obsession with equality at all costs, even if it creates misery. They are willing to do anything, even immoral acts, to reach their goal. I mean, for them, good is anything that advances the revolution. And so it could be anything from killing people to destroying wealth, to destroying the economy. So we need to understand that socialism is evil. It will use any means to destroy Christian society and the natural order. Socialism takes advantage of our fallen nature, by which we tend toward evil, and turns this tendency into a revolt against Christian order. When we give ourselves entirely to this evil, there's no limit to the capacity for hatred or sin and wickedness. And that's what happens with socialism. It cultivates a culture of envy, laziness, and theft. It makes life miserable, but people also end up defending it. The case of socialism is like that of a drug addict. The poor person who is vitiated to drugs finds both gratification and misery in drugs. which he takes to ever greater extremes. Someone might offer the addict money, a house, a car to abandon his lifestyle, but he will often refuse it because he is so addicted to the drug. He is miserable, but he can't live without it. There are cases of drug addicts who are homeless, who refuse decent housing and return to the streets because they no longer want to live to leave their state, even though it's killing them. Well, in a similar way, we could say socialists are vitiated to their ideology and are willing to do and sacrifice everything to promote it, even when it makes them miserable, even if it leads to their deaths, because a lot of revolutionary leaders are killed by the very revolutionaries. The second conclusion is that socialism leads to an eternal fight against the order that God put in nature. It's never live and let live. The socialist doctrine of class struggle holds that history can only be explained as a struggle between the oppressor class and the oppressed. History is a succession of revolutions, tearing down the oppressors wherever and whenever they're found. And because human nature tends to always be establishing new inequalities, this class struggle must be eternal and unrelenting. This hatred must be unyielding and without mercy. Socialism may introduce intermediary phases in this fight, but the final goal is always the same: the fight for total equality in everything and the destruction of hierarchy. And therefore, socialism is a totalizing ideology. It doesn't accept rivals. Wherever it takes over wholly and completely, everyone has to be socialist. There's no exceptions. We only need to look at the history of the last century to verify this statement. Over 100 million people were killed on the altar of socialism, and it will continue to happen as long as it exists. Now, the final conclusion is that it's not hard to see where all this leads. The targets of this hatred are authority, hierarchy, excellence, and inequality. Socialists naturally seek out the highest expression of these targets. And so socialism intensely hates the highest authority. It hates the top of all hierarchies, the most excellent of all beings, and the creator of inequalities. So why not say it? Socialism hates God and seeks to dethrone God. God is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It's a very anti-socialist and anti-egalitarian designation, if ever there was one. And thus, socialism is anti-Catholic by definition, to the point that Pope Pius XI famously declared that, quote, "No one can be at the same time a sincere Catholic and true socialist," in his 1931 encyclical Quadragesimo Anno. He argued that religious socialism and Christian socialism are contradictory terms because socialism focuses only on matter and rejects all things spiritual. Wherever socialism dominates, it persecutes the church because there is nothing so intrinsically anti-socialist as the church. Christian civilization in all its splendor is the triumph of everything that socialism hates. Socialism does not recognize God as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Its followers hate him, his law, and the order he put in the universe. In its more diluted form, socialists will try to adapt and twist God and his doctrine to reflect their own contorted vision of society, as in the case of liberation theologists or these very liberal Catholics. But it is still a hatred of the traditional concept of God. And while it would be an exaggeration to say that every socialist is a Satanist or an anti-God person, we can affirm that its most radical elements are sinister people, and many of them are influenced by the devil. I mean, it has to be that way. The satanic connection is the only way to explain the intense evil, the cruelty and the torture that socialism promotes. The intensity of the hatred for the church is something beyond human nature and necessarily touches on the occult and the satanic. And so we must hate socialism because it hates God and his Holy Mother, and therefore we must defend the church against it. And so we return to the original question, does socialism work? And my answer could only be a resounding yes, it does. It works. If we understand works to mean delivering what it promises, socialism always works. If we see it this way, Krakow's gray alley of despair makes sense. I mean, why would a man work to maintain or beautify a building when it makes him stand out and marks him for socialist persecution? Why would he use refined manners or better clothes or polite language that reinforces charm and courtesy and hierarchical structures? Socialism makes everyone want to be nobody. Everything must be gray, ugly, and empty. It's that common race to the lowest common denominator that keeps going lower and lower and lower. So indeed, in Poland, socialism worked beyond Marx's wildest dreams. Socialism works when it produces gray alleys of despair, identical blocks of apartments, godless societies, and depraved morals. We could say that socialism works wherever it is true to itself, be it in Cuba, Venezuela, here, or in other places. Socialism works whenever it creates a hell on earth, because that's what it does. Its society is one where everything is based upon mutual hatreds between the classes and the desire to overthrow hierarchy and a hierarchical order. This is a pretty complete definition of what's traditionally known as hell. We are not threatened by the socialism that does not work according to Western standards. We are threatened when socialism is true to itself and works, radiating its egalitarian and gray presence everywhere. And so we must fight against socialism by having a very clear notion of what it is. It is a philosophical, materialistic, atheist sect that unites everything around it, contrary to the organic Christian society that we so desire. It is one huge gray alley of despair targeting Christian civilization. We can fight against socialism by emphasizing that this is not just an economic problem, it's a moral problem. Socialism is a sinful, immoral, and unacceptable system contrary to God and our Catholic faith. It is part of the worldwide revolution that we have spoke about so many times in this auditorium. And therefore, we must fight socialism. And the only way to fight against an ideological system that works to the detriment of everyone is with another system that works for the sanctification of everyone. Fighting for the Catholic Church is the most effective way to fight socialism. And so we must actively get involved in the fight. Our goal is to make socialism not work by keeping it from delivering its promises. And we want the Catholic Church to work by delivering everything she promises, which is the sanctification of souls, the betterment of society, the glory of God. We can make the church work by being faithful to her teachings. And that's why we insist so much about defending our faith in the public square. Being a true Catholic requires being a soldier of Christ by the sacrament of confirmation. It's not an abstraction, but a real program in our daily lives. We must fight for the church, the moral law, and Our Lady, wherever it be, opposing it and opposing the destruction of what is left of Christian civilization. And that means fighting the moral evils of the day, be it abortion, drag queen story hours, and other abominations. All these are effective measures, in the final analysis, against socialism. However, the church only works if we do our part. Aided by Our Lady and divine grace, the church accomplished the marvels of history. And so we must therefore work for the Blessed Mother's triumph, where everything will work in accordance with God's will and designs. Thank you very much.